And as we get started, if you want to show what you are working on before we head over to start talking to Steve for a little bit, go ahead and show what we're all working on. Yay! Awesome! Look at all this. This is fantastic.
All right.
So, yeah, this is awesome. So I want to introduce our featured artist for the night, Stephen Evans, who I refer to as Steve because I've known him for a while now. So he is a artist based here in Birmingham, Alabama, originally from the Philadelphia area. Steve received his BFA, Bachelor of Fine Arts, in Painting and Drawing from the University of Arts in Philadelphia, and then later his MA, Master of Arts, and then also his MFA, Master of Fine Arts, in Painting and Drawing from the University of Iowa. Steve has shown all over the country, including to, but not limited, in shows in Los Angeles, Brooklyn, Philadelphia, Iowa City, Cedar Rapids, Charleston, South Carolina, shows at University of Maryland, and then, of course, here in Birmingham, as well as at our institution, the Abrams Engel Institute for the Visual Arts, which is the art museum for the University of Alabama at Birmingham. So Steve does reside here and has been a adjunct member of faculty for UAB's Art and Art History Department, but is currently an adjunct faculty with Stanford University. And he was a preparator with us at AEIVA, but has now moved on to being the preparator at the Birmingham Museum of Art. We miss you so much. He and along with his fellow wife and artist, Lauren Frances Evans, have an adorable daughter, Agnes, who we've heard so much about. They're here on the call as well. And Lauren does teach at Stanford as well. But so welcome, Steve, and I'm excited to talk to you about your art. I'm going to now switch over to sharing my screen, I think. Yes, there we go. All right. Okay. Everyone can see that, right? Yes? Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah. Awesome. All right. And I forgot to do my disclaimer. For those of you that weren't on earlier and didn't hear the serenading, I do have a pet parrot who does occasionally like to chime in, so I apologize in advance. But they've been nice sounds thus far tonight. So, Steve, let's get started. Tell us a little bit about your work, and I guess before we get into your work, a little bit about your influences.
Sure. I didn't grow up reading books very much. I watched a lot of movies. So the TV screen, the movie screen, films was kind of my gateway into painting. Films like E.T., things with a lot of atmosphere and things like that. Is the slideshow there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can you see it?
I can't see it.
We can.
Y'all can, sure. Rachel?
We can see it.
I just see my face really big.
Okay, you can go to gallery view up in the upper corner of your screen. You should be able to toggle what the...
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then so films like E.T. and things like that had a lot of atmosphere, and so you can see the next one later in my adult life, The Exorcist, which actually my brother Ed, I think he saw it when he was like 7 or 8. And
okay, I'm fine.
He's okay, yeah. And it's kind of weird. I keep encountering all these people that keep saying like, "Man, I saw that film when I was like 7 or 8," and it's this weird phenomenon. But anyway, yeah. So these kind of films with this atmosphere, with this extreme kind of moody, brooding lighting, and this kind of existential quality that has been something that's always been important to me. This thing that was happening inside of a frame that was very moving and emotional and like intellectual at the same time.
Can I just say real quick?
Yeah.
This is a leap from E.T. to Exorcist.
Yeah. Well, the E.T. starts out kind of scary. It's a really brilliant film. And both of these films are two of my favorite. Actually, The Exorcist is probably one of my definitely one of my all-time favorite films. And so is E.T. It's really, really brilliant. So a lot of that early Spielberg stuff and Close Encounters of the Third Kind too, it has that, again, that atmosphere, that kind of sense of impending doom, but then also these like kind of philosophical propositions that are embedded in the cinema.
So tell us a little bit about literature as well.
Yeah, so a lot of my work is influenced by these earlier things that, kind of help to foster my creativity as a human being. So as a kid, it was cinema and movies. I loved movies. And then, I saw a Degas show at the Philadelphia Museum, and that's when I decided I wanted to be an artist. And so again, it was that thing that was happening inside of a frame that was had an effect on me, and I decided I wanted to be a part of that. But then nowadays, it's cinema. It's a lot of anything that I consume. Basically, I have to kind of I have to digest it somehow. So it all gets kind of put into the work. So novels, the things I read, and those were like four of my favorite novels that I just think about a lot, and just had this. Stephen King is my favorite, and actually The Exorcist is my all-time favorite novel. It's just the best. And I love The Black Arrow. I'm a huge Stephen King fan, and I can't recommend this Richard Hughes novel enough. Again, all of these books kind of have this sense of atmosphere that I just, really, really love.
So it also sounds, kind of just tying in here, is there a little bit of nostalgia that plays into influence? I see Lauren's head just nodding.
Yeah, no, she can tell you that I am one of the most nostalgic people. Like I'll be like, you ever think about this place? You ever miss this? She's like, I don't think about that like you do. I'm not nostalgic like you are, and I'm always trying to figure out how to recreate things that I've experienced before. And I think that's part of the painting practice, So yeah, big time and very, very nostalgic. I just can't let things go. But yeah, and so children's literature has also been a big influence on me since having a child. I was just totally blown away by all these, some of these books I encountered, and most of us encountered as kids, but some of the just innovative picture making that I experienced with some of these children's books, let alone the writing. I've just come to discover if a book that is written for children is still relevant and impacts you as an adult, it's a good book. So Maurice Sendak, Edward Gorey, more recently Tove Jansson. Agnes and I recently have read the Moomins and the Great Flood, and we've read it many times since then, and it's just really excellent writing with really wonderful pictures, just really great art.
So were all of these ones, I'm not familiar with the Moomins and the Great Flood. I remember the Where the Wild Things Are as a child, and there's all the various versions of Dracula and such, but so was the Wild Things, was that one that you remember from your childhood, or were some of these more introduced to you now that you're a father?
These were kind of like, I remembered it. I don't think I ever owned a copy, but these are more like things that I've rediscovered as an adult. And again, as you can guess, it has a lot to do with that atmosphere, and that a lot of that, I've just been stuck with this nocturnal thing. As a kid, I loved Halloween probably more than Christmas. And I still really do like it a lot, and I really can't tell you why. I'm just kind of stuck there with that. And I think a lot of it has to do with just the creativity and the imagination, and kind of having to face your fears a little bit. But so these are mostly things I kind of re-encountered as an adult and really came to appreciate.
So with that, then let's move on a little bit more to the kind of painterly side, if we will,
Mhm.
your influences there. And I know that landscape and environment and such plays a little bit. So tell us a little bit about your influences as you got into painting.
Yeah. So, as I said, I decided to be an artist when I saw a Degas show at the Philadelphia Museum. And I hadn't decided just then I was going to be a painter. That came later. But so that kind of, again, and that was the atmosphere in his paintings that really I felt like had an effect on me. And I grew up just down the road from Andrew Wyeth. And I worked at the Brandywine River Museum, which is in Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania, right on the Brandywine River. And it houses 3 generations of Wyeth. It's N.C. Wyeth, Andrew Wyeth, and his son Jamie, amongst other things. But yeah, so I was a security guard there for a number of years. So I spent a lot of time with Andrew's work, or Andy as they call him. And I went back and forth with this like love-hate thing with him, but I realized that he's ultimately one of my top painters, probably number 1 next to Philip Guston at this point, because I feel like he really just understands what it means to paint the landscape in a way that there's so much death in his work that I feel like I related to, and this deep understanding that you're going to inevitably and irrevocably return to it. And then Philip Guston for just the kind of more like Freudian psychological things, and also just the kind of primeval, sentiment that comes along with the work. And this attempt to try to just be as free and thoughtless as possible. And the one thing that I'm learning the most about my work is that my subconscious is so far ahead of me that for me to overthink it is just a waste of time. So I'm really just trying to channel that to just not think as much as possible and just paint. And then Robert Gober he paints, but he's not really classified as a painter. He's more of a sculptor or installation artist. And I think the sense of death, the ideas of faith, atmosphere, and this kind of Americana that is found, like everyday objects like sinks and stuff, get like this image here is like it's supposed to be like 2 sinks that are turned into headstones, but are like 2 eyes looking back at you. So all 3 and these are the 3 people I just kind of like keep in my mind all the time. They're like, if I could put these people together, like this is what I would want to do. And I should have put music too. If I could add like a music person to add to these 3 of like, I feel like Sufjan Stevens like encapsulates in music what I would love to do, like in painting and visual art.
Do you listen to music while you paint?
Yeah, sometimes it can be distracting, but I usually do something, but I guess it's like half and half. Sometimes it's too distracting, so I turn it off. And I usually start sometime, unless I know what I'm going to do, I usually start by sitting down and like leafing through books of these people and others and just trying to get things flowing. And I look to painting a lot, other people's paintings for inspiration and even like source material. Because for me, paintings are just like objects out in the world, like rocks and trees. Like it's okay to paint from paintings,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's we're learning now with this whole COVID-19, like art surrounds us everywhere. And so you were just kind of ahead of the game.
Yeah, right. Yeah. True. Yeah.
And putting that front and present in your work.
Right.
So speaking of work, let's talk some about it. So, and for the folks at home, that was my parrot. So she might join in a little bit more. So yeah, kind of walk us through how your art has kind of evolved and.
Yeah. So a lot of the stuff I picked I mean, all my work kind of relates, but these are the things that relate mostly to the images of the influences and the people I've mentioned. There's always a sense of narrative in the work. It hasn't always been that way. It's something I've always wanted, but when I was in undergrad, which is actually where I got to have a solo show at my alma mater, the University of the Arts in Philadelphia, and the gallery when I was there did not look like this at all. It was really dark and, really beat up, and I loved it for that reason, but this is way better. But when I was in undergrad, I fell in love with like Turner, and this is when I decided to be a painter. Like Turner and Whistler and guys like that, with all that atmosphere, landscape painting. I never really had any desire to paint the figure. I kind of still don't very much. But it was my junior year, I started making minimal abstract work, and after that I just didn't look back. And it wasn't until my final year of grad school, I just switched back to representation, because I didn't have a way to work with the minimal abstract thing anymore, and I was realizing that I was trying to use like a visual grammar that just didn't suit me anymore. I didn't know how to like speak with it. So with the help of my cohort and professors and things, I was realizing that the things that were important to me were like the Twilight Zone and Stephen King and Spielberg and philosophy and stuff like that, and narrative and story. So I just kind of moseyed back into that thing, and I haven't touched in a long time. But so this show is you can kind of see, and I'm still trying to. I feel like I'm like building a world, and for these cutouts, I was trying to just take different things that were either from the work or hadn't appeared before. These little things that could be totems or stand-ins, psychologically for like other people, places, things.
And can I ask you what these the stand-ups are made of?
Yeah, some of them are plyboard, or short or like thin balsa. That were either cut out on a bandsaw, or if like the balsa wood I could just cut out with a knife, and then they were painted with a paint that's called milk paint, which is like a powdered pigment that gets mixed with water. It's kind of like a craft paint has been traditionally used for furniture, and like the Shakers would use it for their objects and things. So I liked using that material for the color, and then also it had a spiritual connotation to it already.
That's great. So you're drawn to these particular mediums because of also what they represent as well.
Yeah. As much as I try to not think during the process, I really try to be conscious of what I'm using and for what reasons, and how I fit into the grand narrative and all that, like contextually, and try to be aware. I mean, it always frustrates me when people are try to negate answering certain things about the work because they don't know, to where like if you're just openly saying, I really have no idea, and just painting, like that's so much more refreshing. So it's a mixture of those things, and I feel like every painting for me, and they're mostly all invented landscapes. They're all psychological landscapes for the most part.
So, what about here? So this is a, so are these all the same ones that were in that particular show that we're going through right here?
Yeah, these are all in that same show. Mm-hmm.
So you always have this kind of shadowy type figure, or a figure set back or to the side, or and I hesitate to use figure as well because it's not a defined type figure. Sure. But what draws you back to that sort of theme? What's the thought process behind that?
That figure, which has of lately been coined the Shadow Man, because I did a painting of him and titled it that, and now it's always called that. And so it's weird. I was working with a figure like that when I was in undergrad, except he didn't have a hat on. And then, years later, yeah, there he is. It just dawned on me to use him for some reason as a way of like kind of exercising things out of myself. And so I feel like a lot of the process of painting is like exorcism. You're trying to kind of delve into the deepest part of yourself to try to like get things out and work with them in like a tangible way, and that includes like your anxieties, your fears, your paranoias, which are the things that I try to channel in the work. So it came from a number of places, and one of them is like that, the Jungian idea of like the shadow persona, that is like, all these bottled up dark irrational sides of yourself. And then like the other one came from just a number of Stephen King novels that I felt like were relatable character wise, that were either like somebody's double, or like the dark half, which is also like a title of one of his books. And sometimes it is the Shadow Man, and sometimes it's not the same person. I feel like if it's a back profile like these, it is. But if there's a side profile, I tend to not think of them as the same character.
So not as dark when it's a side profile? Or...
Yeah, maybe not as dangerous, yeah.
So going back to landscape, what constantly draws you? I know you always seem to have had an affinity for it, but what keeps drawing you back to it?
That's a good question. In a lot of ways, I really have no answer to that question. I really don't know. Again, it's where I mean, like my subconscious is kind of like way ahead of me. Again, like, and I feel like it's just a really good, space, formally to just work through things where you can kind of, it's like a box that you can dump all your stuff into, where it can kind of live, and you can play around with it and move it around and get a look at it from afar, like kind of like a curiosity cabinet, if that makes sense. Yeah, but in many ways, I feel like, like Stephen King gets asked a lot, like, why do you write such crazy things, such horrible things? And the answer he usually comes up with is like, why do you think I have a choice? And he kind of goes on to talk about, there's like, we all have these like filters in our minds that are, slowly built over the years by just our own experiences from like your childhood and where you grew up, where you lived, who your parents were, what kind of detergent they used, all that stuff starts to build this like net, this filter, and certain things get caught in there and other things just keep going. And landscape is one of those things for me that is, has just been one of those things that gets caught.
Do you, so this particular one I'm really drawn to because it reminded me immediately of the Robert Frost poem, Road Less Traveled, but both are traveled roads and such. So I know that's probably not the impetus, but that's where my mind went initially.
Yeah.
What's the thought process behind this one in particular?
Yeah. So I should say, like, usually sometimes like with a painting like this and with a lot of my paintings, I don't always know like what the end product is going to be. So I didn't initially like really intend for there to be this kind of like doom and gloom on one side and then something more uplifting on the other. I just started with an idea, like a fork in the road, which obviously has its own like baggage and situational dilemmas, right? But yeah, I just started painting and adding things, and you just kind of know when you're finished, and then it was just like it just came out intuitively. So that's just what happened. So it started with the divergence in the road, and everything else just kind of naturally came from there.
And so none of these places are real, correct?
No.
None of these are all just kind of imagined.
Yeah.
In the moment.
Yeah.
Inspired.
Mm-hmm.
Do any of them? Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, that's good.
Do any of them tend to have like a storyline with it? Do you find a storyline?
I have one sort of in my mind, and even if it's not a story, it's a mood, because there's so much. It's cliche and it probably sounds phony, but it's like there's that old saying. I think, what was it? Oh man, I forget it. Francis Bacon. If I could paint it, why would I talk about it, and vice versa. So a lot about painting is things I can't really say. It's I'm painting it for that reason, but it's more of like trying to elicit a mood, a general. I don't know if my work is doing this, but the German word Gesamtkunstwerk, which is a total work of art, something that is encapsulating of something in its totality. So I feel like that's what every artist or painter is trying to do, but. More so trying to capture a mood with like an implied narrative so that the audience can do what they want with it and imply what they want. And I feel like a lot of times I'm being slick and not giving that much of myself up, but then people have written about my work in the past and it's really kind of caught me off guard and blown me away, and it's very moving to have someone like kind of read your soul like that, but at the same time it's very vulnerable.
I understand that. Yeah, that's it definitely, your painting seems very literary, or at least to me, in that it does tell a story within itself, but then also all together as well. Which is what I love about it. And here's more of the Shadow Man. So this is a recent installation that you and Lauren were in here. Correct. In Birmingham, Tarrant. A kind of part of Birmingham, the Birmingham area at least. And I'm fascinated behind these right here. They are made on found drop clocks.
Yeah.
So what's the thought process behind that? What's the story?
Yeah, well, I should say I got those drop cloths from AEIVA.
That's where they went.
Yeah. Well,
when I threw them out.
The ones that had holes in them. I'm trying to think of like how these first came about. It was really just like, also being a house painter and, just being around a material long enough, it starts to look attractive to you, like and there's like Looney Tune cartoons when they're out in the desert and they start looking at their friends and heads are turning into turkeys and stuff. You spend enough time with the material that you just get used to it. It starts to become attractive. And I like the fact that there was just already so much painting that was already like done for me ahead of time, and these ideas of like work that were kind of, I like working with material that already has a history too, which goes back to that. And you don't have to flip back, but the neon sign, there was an object that I had found in the thrift store, which was like a porcelain head of Jesus. And I like, I like playing with those things. Yeah, this one. And just taking things and just like putting them together and see how they converse, how they talk to one another and create like a new narrative. So taking the drop cloths, and at the time I just really needed, to feel something a little bit more visceral than the tiny little paintings I was making in my studio, which were like tiny paintings with acrylic and oil on wood panel. And I've been teaching drawing for like 5 or 6 years now. Is that right? And so drawing has become a big part of my process, which you'll see later. So this was a way I could integrate and incorporate my drawing in with the painting in a more like visceral way. Behaving more like an action painter, making these like they're on the floor. I'm like hovering over them. I'm on my hands and knees. I'm doing them pretty quick. They're more gestural and loose and kind of crude and instantaneous, which I really liked. And I was looking at like a lot of early American quilts, and a lot of my work is kind of steeped in American art and thinking about what it means to be like an American painter and stuff like that. And there's a lot of like kind of dark baggage that comes with those kind of early settler American quilts and things like that. But it's really just a jumping point for me. I'm not dwelling on it too much, the contextual stuff. And again, they're just kind of creating these like isolated moments, these kind of totems that are like psychological avatars, if you will, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, well, you've got you have the Dracula over here on the right, and then you had directly referenced that book earlier in.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, definitely can see the process within it as well. So here's some more shots of that.
Yeah, and I should say all this work was made since like the fall of 2019 up until the winter. And these drawings are on newsprint with charcoal, which there's a lot more than what was able to go that I put in the show. And these are all for an artist book that I'm working on that will eventually all get compiled with some watercolors on newsprint. And these are all stream of consciousness, again, like try not to think too much about it. And in some ways it works like a diary, just sitting down to make a drawing instead of writing. But it very much felt similar or akin to that.
So I know we're running closer into, I want to make sure we get through some of these other things. So you had included these, and I know when we had talked before, I asked you to share like maybe some fun, because you're always telling us when you were at AEIVA stories behind things or your inspirations and such. So, and I loved those. So let's go through some of those.
Yeah. Well, I should say, I mean, since my brother's here, he and I had an experience together that was really transformative for me, that took place in northern Minnesota, on a lake up there pretty close to Canada. It's when I kind of started using more trees and these particular kind of like piney looking ones, where everyone else had kind of gone to bed, and he was like, you want to take the canoe out? And it was like 10 o'clock at night, and I was like terrified. I was like, yeah, let's do it. So we took the canoe out, and the water was just so still, and we just kind of paddled out to the middle of the lake, and it was completely clear night, and you could see the stars reflected in the water, and there was loons in the background, and this full moon, and just this like island of mist was kind of drifting across the lake, and bats kind of nipping at bugs, and we just sat there for a minute, and I was just blown away by that experience. I just never shake that experience. So that's kind of been, that might have been a tipping point for me, for working with representation. Even though it was like 2 or 3 years later after that experience where I started making more work like this. This was actually 4 or 5 years after that. But a lot of the work comes from memory or dreams. So this particular painting was a dream that I had. Gosh, I was maybe 5 or 6. I had a dream that this orb had like floated out of my grandmother's window and then like drifted across the yard and like went into the house next door. And that was just, some of those dreams I've had as a child, again, like super atmospheric. I just never forget. And I think the next slide is a drawing this came first. The drawing came first. So I was keeping a sketchbook. I was doing a lot of drawing because I could just sit down like at the table or watching a film, and I could just do this tiny little drawing. And these are practically the size of thumbnails. Like this one's probably like, I don't know, 4 by 5 inches or something like that. And they're very quick and again, very atmospheric and moody, and channeling some of the illustration probably I've been looking at. But it's called Jane's Window, and Jane was my grandmother. She didn't die after that dream. It wasn't until many years later. So it wasn't really prophetic in any way, but it was just like a thing that was crazy.
That you just associate with that place.
Yeah, and this isn't even the house I grew up. It's just an invented house with an invented neighborhood or landscape. You know, you can obviously see how they changed. Yeah, I kind of have zero desire to try to capture something exactly. I've never been that way. You know, I see myself a lot in my daughter because we're like, sometimes we'll be trying to teach her something, and she'll be like, well, you know, people can do it this way or that way. It's not really a big deal. You know, I can do it this way. People can do it however they want. And, you know, I see myself a lot in that, you know, sentiment. This drawing also included my brother. This was a dream I had where he and I were sitting in the dining room in that same house. I had that other dream, and it would seem like a really frightening thing, but it was actually like a really fantastic dream. I didn't have the same dream twice. I had a similar dream 2 times where we were sitting there and we were playing with something, and then my mom came through the kitchen door. We had this like big, heavy, like, you know, swinging kitchen door for this house. And she's like, I got a surprise for you. And we're like, what? And she just like stands beside it, and this like steam train just come barreling through the dining room. And we just stood there like in awe, like we were like, yeah, this is amazing. You know, this train, beautiful train, it's just like barreling through here, you know. And I had that dream twice. The first time was like great, and it's like, oh, I've got to think for you again. It's like, oh man, which is just bizarre.
Train in it's I personally love trains, and so like I've had a similar type thing. So I'm sitting here reliving my own dream as you're talking about that one.
Yeah. But I had a huge infatuation with trains as a kid too.
Yeah. So what about this one here? This one looks a little bit darker.
Yeah. I've actually had a series of like werewolf/wolf dreams throughout like my entire history. And this is a drawing of the very first one I had when I was like 5, that I remember like perfectly. And this is actually our neighbor's house across the street, Joe and Ted. This was like their like back walkway and a gate that went to their backyard. And that's like their shed. And I just remember like being there and then like being chased by this werewolf. And ever since then, I've had like repeated dreams, and they're like years and years in between. And I haven't had one in a long time, but I can remember just about every single one of them. And so it felt like worth trying to like exercise, you know?
Right. And is this the shadow person back here with that?
No, those are just plants and vegetation and things.
I didn't know if your shadow man had made its way in.
Yeah, not in this drawing.
So what about this one?
Yeah, Ed, you might recognize this. This is my neighbor across from my dad's house. This is Joey Mercandani's old house. And Joey Mercandani was a character. I mean, our neighborhood was full of crazy stuff. Like, I mean, just like, you know, like people in the pagan motorcycle gang down the street. There was like a murder or something where a guy like hacked up his elderly woman with a machete, and just crazy stuff. And Joey was the icing on the cake. he would just do all kinds of bizarre, crazy things. And this is a drawing. One night, it was probably like 3 or 4 in the morning, and Joey decided to go out and mow his lawn, pitch black night. And, you know, so he'd be out there mowing, and he's running over sticks and rocks and stuff, and it would cut out, and he'd just, just rev up the lawnmower again and just keep going. So it was like these really weird, strange, bizarre, like this. By the time I'm 80, if I live that long, I'm sure I'll look back on this and ask myself, like, if it was real. You know, did that really happen? Or was that just a dream, you know? It's so bizarre, it could have been a dream.
It definitely sounds like something out of a dream for sure.
Yeah.
So what about this?
Yeah, so this was oh man, I was on my birthday with Lawrence before we were married. I think I was 23. And we went to go see a Girl with the Dragon Tattoo on my birthday. And it was fun because she just got me a like a Timex watch that, you know, you could push the button, it would glow in the dark, and I kept like messing with my watch during the movie just because I was like playing with the button to make it light up over and over again. But it was just also like a really good film that stuck with me for a while in like a really good way. Yeah, and just this cinema working its way back in, it's tapping into this like art historical thing of like paintings inside of paintings, things like that.
Yeah, it becomes a reoccurring theme.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on, what show is this one from?
This is actually from my MFA thesis show called The Blackberry Bramble, which takes its title from a Stephen King novella called The Body, which is, if you've all seen Stand By Me, is what that was adapted from. It's where these young boys, just before they leave middle school or elementary school to start middle school, and there's this boy, Ray Brower, that has gone missing, and they find out that they know where his body is, and they're going to do this pilgrimage to go and find the body of Ray Brower, hence the title of the novella. And when they do find him, they really don't feel like heroes, and it's a really good coming of age story that, you know, looking death in the face, quite literally in that respect. But anyway, so I was playing on that, and a lot of my kind of dissertation writing had a lot to do with that story as a kind of grounds. But again, working from memory, I made this little maquette or model of my dad's house, hence the title. My father's house had like balsa wood, cardboard, stuff like that. And you'll notice that the house does not have any doors or windows, save for what we call a trap door. Some people call it a cellar door or a basement door, but we always call it the trap door. And the trap door led down to what we called the tunnel, which was like, you know, an unfinished part of the basement that had the crawl space underneath, and there was 2 doors, like the trap door and then like the door that went to the rest of the basement. And it was always dark. It was like something that Indiana Jones saw, like spider webs and stuff. And the thing about the tunnel was, in order to turn the light on, you had to go like halfway through it to like into the dark to like turn the light on. You know, so for me to have this house with this like one little light, and the only way in or out of this thing is like through that trapdoor. So it was just like, again, playing with that like Stephen King, Robert Gober kind of Americana mixed with like landscape painting and like nostalgia, and also working with like the sublime, you know, or at least ideas of the sublime.
So, making books. So earlier you were telling us that some of the sketches and such were going into a book. So let's talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so that one I started before quarantine. The ones that I'm sharing here under this description, I've been outlining and writing like children's books for my daughter for a while now, but now I'm finally getting around to like actualizing a lot of them and like actually making them. So these images are for some books that I'm working on right now. When I can get some time to work on them. Books for Agnes these are just tiny things on paper with gouache and acrylic. And you'll kind of see this transitions into another book, and this is pencil and watercolor. So a lot of the same things, same different themes of dealing with fear and stuff like that, classic things children are afraid of, however realistic or irrational, like a giant spider or an alligator in the backyard. Monsters, ghosts, or, Draculas. All those things, and this isn't all the images for the book. I promise it's a little bit more optimistic towards the end. But then I've also so I've been working on those. I've been kind of like exploding with ideas for those books, and it's really, since becoming a parent, I've really been invested in children's literature and become kind of a snob. But it's taught me a lot about myself and human nature and things like that. So it's been a big inspiration. And I've also been working on the iPad, which is new for me, with the Apple Pencil. Just kind of something to do that I can do quick and work out ideas and stuff like that in a kind of like a fearless way, because you can always just erase. So the previous image is a drawing of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who was a Jesuit priest, that was a Jesuit priest but also a scientist. He was a paleontologist who was a big part of finding the Peking Man skull and remains, which was like a huge kind of scientific breakthrough. And he also did a lot of contribution of writing of theology and incorporating science and faith, which he's a big champion of mine and has been helping me a lot through this time. So I thought and I'm also working on a kid's book for adults too about him loosely. And the next image is potentially going to be for a t-shirt design. A guy I know, a buddy of mine here in town, reached out to me and asked me if I want to do like a print series. And I thought that'd be really cool, but now I thought, like, well, what if we did like t-shirts, like things like people can wear and like walk around with art on it.
I think you already have some pre-orders in the crowd already.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, so I think we'll do a few. So this could potentially be one of them. So, and I just like how life and death are kind of encapsulated in that, which I feel like I'm trying to encapsulate in all my work, is life and death kind of simultaneously being present.
So I have one more question, but before I ask mine, are there any questions from the crowd? And you're welcome to unmute yourself or type into the chat. Well, I have a question. So has this whole COVID quarantine impacted your art in any way? Or that you've noticed or that you've thought about?
Yeah, big time. And I think a lot of it has been like making children's books. I've encountered and experienced a new kind of freedom by just making something to make it for a certain purpose. And again, I get a lot of inspiration from children's books because there's such a freeness in them, which creates really innovative picture making. So working on those books has been really great and given me a lot of freedom. And, a lot of, for me, like looking at other artists and other art is like looking for permission to do certain things. So that's been huge for me. And yes, and that's opened me up for like in my painting to just like do more things, to just try to think a little bit less, and just work with what I got. So that's been huge.
That's awesome. And then we'll see the manifestations of that later on down the road. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Well, are there any final questions? I want to make sure. We have quite a few people on, so I have to kind of filter back and through. Well, thank you, Steve, and thank you, everyone, for being on. We are right out at time, but before we get off, I am going to stop sharing my screen and get rid of this, close that. And if you guys will hold up what you've been working on, and so we can do a screenshot of it later. And awesome! So awesome! Yay!
Awesome. Oh, I love it.
That's so great. So great, thank you guys. And if you're like me and you haven't finished and you want to finish, oh, I see we've got like 3 or 4 that we're going through.
Oh, yeah.
So if you want to share these on social media, please tag us at AEIVA UAB. So that's AEIVA UAB. And we will put it here in the chat as well. And that's on Instagram. And then you can find us on Facebook as well and tag us there, and we'll be sure to share these with everyone. We hope you guys had a great time. We love doing this. It's always really great to decompress and then talk to some of our favorite artists that we've had at AEIVA in the past. So thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
And we hope to see you guys back on next week with Paul Rasconi. So thank you, everyone. Y'all have a good night.
Thanks, Christina. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.